How did I overcome my professional anxiety and imposter syndrome as an autistic boss? Hi, I'm Brett. I'm an autistic boss with ADHD, and on this channel, we talk about ADHD and autism in the workplace. I'm Brett. I have over 10 years leadership training and experience. Becoming a new manager for me was a weird transition part. Now, being autistic, transitions are always kind of difficult for me, and I didn't know I was autistic at the time that I became a manager, which was about 12 or 13 years ago. So a lot of what I'm thinking about on this side of my late diagnosis is helping me sort of process and understand what it meant to be an autistic manager with ADHD, an AuDHD boss. One of the hardest parts about transitioning wasn't a manager of a team. I really was sort of free to sort of speak more candidly. I really was sort of known as sort of like an ideas person. I have ADHD. I didn't know I had ADHD at the time. I'm able to sort of sit down, look at any idea, look at any problem, look at any solution, and sort of just crank out ideas. It's one of the areas where ADHD works to my benefit is I'm able to just crank out ideas. I have a lot of ideas all the time. Now, executing on those ideas can be really hard because of my ADHD, but autism does help me move forward in those spaces. At that time, I was able to sort of look at situations because of, again, on this side of the diagnosis, I know this now, I'm able to look at situations with the autistic part of me, ask critical questions, look at pattern recognition, look at all these different things, and with the ADHD part of me come in with a lot of ideas and solutions for things that I would identify because of my autism. Those are the things that helped me become a manager, get noticed on the management level. Now, I just sort of did this. I didn't really ask permission to do it. I just sort of spoke very candidly in many ways. I was always respectful, but I always sort of offered up ideas and solutions without waiting to be asked for those things. I would sometimes do it diplomatically. Sometimes I would be a little bit more blunt about it in the meetings that I was in. The other reason why I sort of chased being a manager rather unintentionally is I wanted to be able to make the decisions that I wanted to make creatively. I wanted to be able to be in charge of the creative choices that I and the people I was working with every day were able to make so that I could be a little bit more free in the creative decisions I was making. Combined with those two things, that's one of the major reasons of why and how I became a manager. But once I made that shift from being a non-manager to a manager, one of the hardest things was there was these two different ways people would start to communicate with me differently. People would before come to me and sort of tell me a lot of like the gossip and a lot of the different things that were going on. And I would hear all these different things and I could kind of jump in and sort of help bring solutions and ideas to people. And it didn't really matter at that time because I wasn't a manager. So people felt a little bit more free to tell me things. When you're a new manager, there's this window of time where you're kind of like untouchable. You're kind of like Super Mario with the star card where you're running around and you're kind of able to do pretty much anything you want because you're a new manager. That sort of sweet spot as a new manager only lasts about 6 months to a year. So a lot of people will come and try to take advantage of that by bringing you their problems, bringing you their ideas, ask you to do things for them, ask you to do this, ask you to do that. Happens all the time. I've seen it with every single new manager that's come in, but I definitely remember being at the center of those conversations. And there's sort of this sweet spot of people not wanting to bring you their problems because now that you're in management, they don't want you to know certain things or they don't want you to know the gossip or they feel you might have to report something. On the other hand, you've got people bringing all their problems to you because they think with your new manager powers, you have this magic wand that you can fix everything and that you're going to get everything that you need and everything that you want. And you can fix everybody's problem. Answer is somewhere in the middle because on one hand, you want to still hear all those things you were hearing before you were a manager so that you can help be effective in those places. Other times you don't want to know that stuff because you don't want to be responsible for those things. If it's just hearsay or if it's just gossip, you don't want to get involved in that stuff. But on the other hand, you want to make sure that you don't have people bringing you all their problems that necessarily don't have anything to do with you, might cause friction among other managers, or really are not your domain to be jumping into. So you kind of have to use critical reading skills and critical understanding skills to assess what's mine to get involved with, what's not mine to get involved with, and find a way to sort of help people find a path forward, even if that's not through you, which was always really hard to do. And it felt like letting people down often. And a lot of times what would happen when I would do that is another manager would come to me like, hey, you don't have all the context here. You don't know the full story. There's more things you can now know because you're a manager. And then I'd have to walk back to that person and be like, hey, look, there's more things going on that I'm able to get involved with. Tried, I'm sorry, it can't happen. And a lot of people people for the most part kind of understand that stuff, but it can also be very time consuming. That's one of the first places where I felt a lot of anxiety, because I really sort of felt like I had this responsibility to the people who promoted me. I had this responsibility to the people that I was now the manager of. I had the responsibility of, holy moly, what have I gotten myself into? That change, that transition of getting into that new position, there was a lot of like, oh my God, what have I done? What have I done? What have I done? It's sort of wondering, well, what are their expectations of me? And what am I supposed to do now with those expectations? And that was one of the really big anxiety driving points, was what is expected of me now as a manager? Because I was a working person before, I continued to be a working manager. So I was really sort of involved and continue to be involved in all the different projects and all the different things. How do you make that transition from being the hands-on person from your department to suddenly being the manager who wants to still be hands-on and technical and creative and do all these things, but you've also got to let your people shine. You've got to let your people do and bring all those ideas and things. One of the hard things I needed to learn in that transition point was I needed to be able to have a vision for my team, for my department, communicate that vision, communicate those ideas so that I had a direction for where we were going to go, and then back off and let the team figure out how we would achieve that vision. The other thing that was critically important for me was eventually learning that I didn't need to have all the answers, and I didn't need to have a lock and a hold on that vision, that it was okay for other people to inform the idea, inform the vision. And that's the part with my ADHD that I absolutely love the most. When I'm in a creative atmosphere with my colleagues, and we're all brainstorming together and we're all clicking on the same page, and this idea feeds to that idea, that kind of stuff helps reduce my anxiety as a boss, because I know that the team is clicking. I know that we're on the same page. It's a matter of deciding, okay, which idea are we going to go with? How are we going to do all these different things? That was another area that brought me a lot of anxiety too, was sort of the people managing. I had always sort of had early training as a people manager. I sort of figured out how to be a people manager, and now I had to formally be a people manager. There was ways that I saw a lot of people manage me and manage others around me. And I would sort of pick up on what I thought was effective and what I thought wasn't effective. And about a year and a half into being a manager, I finally was able to find an amazing mentor who also happened to be a new boss for me at that time. And that mentor was able to help me learn my way through a lot of those anxiety points. And that was one of the key things, making sure that I had a mentor who I could lean into, who I could take my wondering to, I could take my questions to, I could figure things out with, but also someone who I could watch and observe and figure out how to do certain things. And what eventually that would help me do is my anxiety, my imposter syndrome would sort of cause a lot of defensiveness. It would cause these knee-jerk reactions of like things that I thought I needed to do or reactions I need to have, even rigid rules that I thought had to be a certain way. Watching my mentor and learning from my mentor, I learned over the course of time to sort of hold on to those reactions, hold them back, let something sit for a bit, or ask more inquisitive questions, ask more things to lead to more context, to more curiosity, and then make a judgment call, or then bring people along with me to make decisions or judgment calls. Those were critical lessons. And as I learned those lessons, it reduced my anxiety because I was able to sort of figure out how to work with people. And it took off the pressure off myself to feel like I always had to have the decisions. I always had to have the answers for everything. And also one of the biggest anxiety points for me was that fear of missing out as a boss, which led to too much micromanaging. I had one manager who I had promoted within my team to a manager role, who was brilliant, who was smart, who was exceptional, but I needed to know every single thing they were doing, which got in their way. I needed to know what they were doing because that was the job I had had before they had it. And so letting go of not having that job and not having all the answers and not having all the data and not having all the information and not knowing all that stuff at my fingertips gave me tremendous FOMO, made me feel really anxious, and it made me feel kind of like on edge a little bit when I would go into more senior leadership team meetings, because I felt like I really always needed to have that information at my fingertips. And I know on this side, there's a little bit of my ADHD and my autism. That manager and I then figured out a way to make that work, but I needed to be able to gradually release the responsibility, and they could do it in their own way, not the way that I did it, the way that they would do it, because that's why I promoted them and that's why I put them in that role. That fear of missing out really came from the fact that as a boss, you're responsible for your whole team. When I was a television producer, the rule was if anything went wrong, it's all your fault. I carried that with me to being a boss, a manager as well. So you're responsible for your department, you're responsible for your team, you're responsible for your people, and you're responsible for the things that they do. At the same time, you have a responsibility to that team to represent them, to fight for them, to advocate for them, and to make sure that they're getting the best that they can get out of the overall company, because you're representing them as a team and as a department. And you're only as effective as you can be if your team is good and if your team is doing what they need to do and are getting what they need to get. My number one job, as I soon learned, was the number one expectation for me as a boss was to be the boss, was to be the person who was advocating for my team, who was knowledgeable about what my team was doing, but didn't get in the way of what they were doing, but knew enough that I could advocate for resources, for their needs, for the things that they needed to do and things that they needed to know. Both of those things, what they needed to know and what they needed to do, and how we were going to get those things done. A lot of times in corporate America, when somebody becomes a boss, they're just kind of thrown into it. It's just like, okay, you're the boss now. And there's no one sort of there to sit you down and go, okay, here's what that means. Here's how you are to become the boss. Here's what all of that entails. And it's going to be different for every role, of course. Core expectation to be responsible for the department and that team and the work that they need to do, and to make sure that that work gets done. And in many cases, the ideas and the thought generation that that team produces and comes out. You're also then expected to represent that team and take care of that team and advocate for that team so that they're getting what they need to get, so that they're effective in their job. The more effective they are, the better you are as a boss, as a manager. One of the other anxiety points that I had as an autistic boss was you'd sit inside senior leadership team meetings and you would learn about different things and you couldn't share those things out. So you had to figure out when, you had to be told when it's appropriate to share that news or that information with your team and when it's not appropriate. And sometimes sitting with that information and being nervous I might say something accidentally, that was always an anxiety. It's still an anxiety point now to this day. But now I've got tools to sort of figure that out, and I've got mechanisms where I can talk to other senior leadership team members about those things, because I'm a verbal processor. So I can now go talk to my boss or other leadership team members, have that conversation so that I can complete that circle for myself. I had to quickly learn how to carry myself differently, how to speak differently, how I responded to situations and conversations differently. Now that I was an actual manager, now that I was somebody's boss, that took a really, really long time, longer than it should have, for me to figure all that out. But of course, now I know on this side, that's a part of the processing for me in terms of being an autistic boss with ADHD. So I now know how to do that. It also meant more scripting. It meant more masking for me, which was really sort of difficult and created more anxiety. Certainly one of the things about the professional anxiety was I needed to mask a little bit more. I needed to have more scripting. I needed to be more mindful of the things that I said. Those things were really critically important to how I was perceived, and being worried more about how I was perceived among the people I reported to and the people I was responsible to, how I showed up in different meetings and all these different things. I thought too much about that in those first few years as being a manager. The more time I spent in the role, the more comfortable I was. The more I knew what was expected of me, the more comfortable I got, the less anxious I got, the less imposter syndrome I had. The biggest solution for really any anxiety that I've had as a boss is to ask a lot of questions, to become very knowledgeable about all the different things. One of the things that I've done, again, I didn't really realize this was my autism until much later. I wanted to learn as much as I could about everything, not necessarily so that I could do it all, but so that I was knowledgeable, so that I understood how this system and this workflow talked to this system and this workflow, so that I could understand how things all came together in the big picture, all the different pieces of the big puzzle, ADHD. But I wanted to know everything so that I could be knowledgeable and so that I could understand. And the more I understood, the more knowledgeable I was about different things, the more that imposter syndrome would go down, the more that anxiety would go down, and the more I felt more secure. It also helped me better understand, again, what was expected of me. The more you can kind of get, especially your boss, to sort of walk through what's expected of you, the more that can kind of reduce that professional anxiety, especially as a new manager. You kind of need that new manager toolbox. And I'll link to a couple of resources down below of some really amazing people that can kind of help better understand how to become just a good manager, a good leader. Definitely having a vision for things you want to do goes a really long way, both in what you want to communicate up and what you want to communicate to your team. I hope some of that was helpful. Be sure to check out my mistakes that I made as an autistic boss. Thanks for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. If you have a question or a topic or an idea or something that you'd like for me to cover, please let me know in the comments. I'm very responsive to the comments, so please definitely comment below. Please be sure to check out some of the other videos while you're on my channel. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and be sure to follow for more.